Hey, Master Coach G here on Thriving After 50, Mind, Body, Soul. And in today's episode, I am going to continue my conversation about our emotional health. And today I'm talking about how to identify our emotional triggers. Identifying our emotional triggers can be helpful in steps in understanding and managing our emotions. So I'm going to talk about 3 steps that we should take in order to be able to understand and better manage our emotions. The first one is self-awareness. The second one is reflecting on our emotions. And the third one is keeping a journal of our emotions. And I'm going to go further into that here in a little bit. But being able to identify emotional triggers is an ongoing process, okay, that requires self-reflection, observation, and sometimes external support. It's essential that we approach this process with kindness and patience toward ourselves because it is a process. So I'm going to dive deeper into the subject, identifying your emotional triggers. I'm Master Coach G, and I'll see you on the inside. Hey, Master Coach G here on Thriving After 50, Mind, Body, Soul. And on today's episode, I am going to continue my conversation about our emotional health. And today, I'm going to talk about identifying our emotional triggers. Now, here's the thing about identifying our emotional triggers is that it can be helpful steps in understanding and managing our emotions, and that is important to be able to know how to manage your emotions. So here are 3 steps that I want to start with in identifying your emotional triggers. Self-awareness, very important. Goes back to the 3 A's. Awareness. Self-awareness starts by being aware of your emotions and paying attention to any sudden shifts or intense reactions to what it is that you're experiencing at that moment, whatever the trigger was. Noticing when you feel angry or sad, anxious, or any other strong emotion. This self-awareness will help you to identify the potential trigger. The next step is reflect on your emotions, which is the second A, which is take accountability. Once you are aware of the emotion, then take time to reflect on what might have caused that emotion. You have to ask yourself questions like, what happened right before I started to feel this way? What thoughts or memories are associated with this emotion? See, asking yourself these questions allow you to get to the root cause of that particular emotion that you're having. Identifying specific situations or events that trigger your emotions can give you some valuable insight. So that's the reason why it is important that you do reflection on the emotions that you're feeling. Here is step number 3. Keep a journal. Write down your emotions and the trigger in the journal. That can be a very powerful tool for your self-discovery. Make a habit of recording your emotional experiences and the circumstances surrounding them. Over time, the patterns may merge and you'll gain a deeper understanding of your emotional triggers. Now, remember that identifying your emotional triggers is a personal process that requires self-reflection and observation. So that means that you have to pay attention to how you're feeling. You have to pay attention to the emotions so that you can be able to identify it. And that takes time. Practicing self-awareness and reflection can gradually become more in tune to your emotions and their triggers. Here's another thing that you have to pay attention to is your physical sensation. Okay, pay attention to your physical sensations that may accompany the emotional reaction. For example, You may notice a tightness in your chest, or your heart may be racing, or your muscles may be getting tense. That's a physical cue that provides you information about the trigger. And that's what's causing the emotional response. Patterns and repetition is another thing that we have to look out for. Look for patterns and repetitions in your emotional reactions, because that is very important. Certain situations, people, events that consistently conflict with your particular emotional state that you're having. You're having a response to that. So being able to identify the patterns can help you pinpoint the triggers more accurately. You may have had some of these things through childhood experiences. Sometimes emotional triggers can stem from past experience, particularly those from our childhood. Like childhood traumas that's unresolved. I talked about that in the last episode in reference to my struggles with some emotional baggage that I had, and because it was unresolved from my childhood, and those issues can influence our emotional responses even in our present time, and I'm living proof of that, and I just shared that in my last podcast. So reflecting on your past, exploring any unresolved emotions can shed light on your current triggers. Now, here's another thing that you got to pay attention to is your thought patterns. Okay? Sometimes we have a thought and we don't know how to let go of it. We play it over and over and over and over and over again in our heads. That's a thought pattern. So you have to pay attention to those thought patterns because they play a significant role in our emotional experiences. So notice the thoughts and the beliefs that arise when you experience an intense emotional feeling. These thoughts can act as triggers and amplify your emotional reaction. By identifying the emotion and challenging any negative, distorted thought patterns, okay, you have to be able to challenge yourself to be able to identify if it's a distorted thought or if it's something that's real. And you can gain control over those emotional triggers with that tool right there, okay? Here's another thing that you can do as well is seek feedback from others. Sometimes others can provide valuable insight into our emotional triggers. A trusted friend or family member, or even a therapist or a coach, can offer a different perspective. So it might be helpful for you to be able to seek help in identifying your emotional triggers that you may not be aware of yourself. Remember, identifying your triggers is an ongoing process. I can't even stress that enough. It requires self-reflection, observation, and sometimes the external support, which is therapist, family friend, coach. But it's essential sometimes that we do get that outside support. It's essential to also to approach this process with kindness toward ourselves, because sometimes we can be hard. And I mentioned that when I was talking about the 3 A's, the awareness and the accountability. Sometimes when we take accountability, we have judgment with the accountability, okay? So that's why we have to be kind and patient to ourselves with no judgment, okay? So by understanding the triggers, it helps you to develop a strategy to be able to manage and respond to your emotions in a healthier way. So whenever you have an emotional trigger, what I want you to do is to stop and take the time and ask yourself those questions. What did I feel right before this? Where did this come from? Pay attention to your patterns, to your thought patterns. That's very, very important, to pay attention to your thought patterns, because that is what leads to the emotional trigger. And the more you are aware of your thought patterns, the more you can come up with a strategy, which is the adjustments, going back to the 3 A's, the awareness, the acknowledgement, and the adjustments. These tools will give you what you need in order to be able to manage your emotional triggers. Again, we got to pay attention to our thought patterns. That's very important because, again, if we keep playing the same record over and over again, I don't know, maybe some of you all are young enough. Well, if you're 50 and over, then you remember record players and LPs and 45s. And we handle those records with gloves, like we didn't want to get a piece of dust on it, so we were very particular about getting anything on it because we know that if it got scratched that it wasn't going to play the same. So that's how we have to look at our emotional triggers, because sometimes we play it over and over and over again. So what you have to do is, if you don't want to keep playing the same record or the same LP over and over and over again, then you have to, on purpose, deliberately, intentionally scratch the record. You got to scratch the record. And in order to do that, you have to go through these steps that I just gave you so that you will be able to manage the patterns, your thought patterns. Again, please, 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 I can't emphasize this enough. Please understand that this is a process. You have to practice. It doesn't happen overnight, but the more you practice it and be aware of your patterns, your thought patterns, that's going to give you the ability to be able to identify your emotional triggers. Again, it is an ongoing process. And you have to have self-reflection and observation. And pay attention to your feelings, your emotions, whatever that is, happy, sad, anxious, whatever it is. Pay attention to that, because that's what's going to help you to understand your emotional triggers. Hey, that's what I have for you today. I hope that this has been some help to you, some helpful insight, that it will add value to your life. Thank you for joining me here on Thriving After 50, Mind, Body, Soul. And hey, while I'm at it, let me give a shout out to all my listeners here in the United States, Canada, Belgium, United Kingdom, Mexico, Russia, France, and Brazil. I really appreciate you all listening, and I hope that this will continue to add value and you will be able to apply this knowledge, because again, applied knowledge is power. And I hope that this podcast has been a benefit to you. If it has, please share it, like it, download it so that it can help somebody else. I really appreciate y'all. This is Master Coach G, and I'll see you on the next level.